TV.
Hello and welcome to Everyday Politics with Laura May Lindo. I am your host, Laura May. And today we're tuning in on land held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. And I offer you this reflection just before I introduce you to some of my students from the University of Waterloo. When I think of Indigenous elders and some of the lessons that they've taught me over the years, there's always been a deep care for young people. And I think sometimes we translate that care into, letting young people speak, but we don't always translate that care into really listening to what young people offer, the wisdom that they hold. And some of that wisdom is actually in the way that they dream about a different kind of world. And so I am very excited to introduce you to some of my students at the university, because as I have been learning from them and learning alongside them, I've started to get a lot of hope that the world can be different, hope that we can think differently about politics, hope that these will be the new crop of elected officials, hope that these are the people that are going to become leaders, connected in community and connected outside of community too. And so I can't wait to introduce you to everyone, and we will come right back after this.
It's the personal finance show that dares to ask those money questions you've always wanted to. Join Mike Bregueth when he talks with experts on all aspects of money. Money Matters with Mike Bregueth, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on Rogers.
Public transit, garbage pickup, parks and recreation programs, snow removal on your street. How can you stay informed about these and other important local services? Tune to City Council coverage on Rogers TV. See your community leaders at work on Rogers TV City Council coverage.
Hey folks, it's me, Giovanni Petiti, the host of Not Tonight. It's the new late night talk show right here on Rogers TV. We got fabulous guests, a lot of laughs. It's just like the Jimmy Kimmel Show. If you order the Jimmy Kimmel Show on Wish. So join me Sunday at 10 o'clock right here on Rogers TV. Nice.
Today, I helped a parent feed their family by connecting them to a food program.
Today, I helped someone connect with mental health supports.
Today, I helped a couple struggling to pay their bills access financial aid.
Every day, 211 navigators connect Canadians to critical government and community programs and services.
211. Help starts here.
Struggling with today? Spend it with us. Join me, Ben Strasser, on January 20th for the 9th annual Kickback Mental Health Marathon on Rogers TV. We'll share real stories, tackle grief, anxiety, depression, addiction, and more. Together, let's heal, let's make a difference.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am so excited to have three of my students from the University of Waterloo joining me. So I'm going to start off before I ask any questions. Just introduce yourselves.
Of course. Hi, my name is Kaylia McKinnon, and I'm a fourth-year student at the University of Waterloo.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, I'm Tyla. I'm fourth year at UW, and my program that I study is Social Development Studies.
Beautiful, thank you. And
I'm Avery Jeffcott. I also study at Waterloo. I'm in third year, and I also do a little bit of research for you on the side.
A little baby research. I love it. I love it. So listen, before I ask you the first question, I'm just going to remind the folks that are watching about one of my favorite questions in the show. So the fourth question for all of my guests is always, if you could snap your fingers and you could make one system change, what would it be? So let's actually watch what was said for my first guest, episode 1, when I first started, and also the last guest of 2024. So give us one moment. Imagine if you could snap your fingers and make one systemic change. What would that change be?
I really struggled with this question because I was like, how do you pick one? But you know, one of the things that's irked me for years is, and when you were talking about the UN Declaration and how it went into the 2 readings and then it's now languished. Yeah. Basically, it's gone nowhere. Yeah. And back in 1994, I think it was, could have been 6. Anyway, there was the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples report was released. And I can't remember. Every now and then I look it up, but I always forget it. There's hundreds of recommendations in that report, and it's never been implemented. So if I could snap my fingers, I'd implement RCAP.
I would want more resources for people in poverty or domestic violence situations, any difficult situation where they have to flee. I would want more resources for that. I want more money to go to the youth and the education systems and the board, because the youth is who we should be investing in, I believe. Because when I'm gone, there's going to be someone else who is going to benefit from all the things I taught or all the things I've helped them learn. So I think that's my answer, I feel.
So listen, when I watched episode 1, so when I was talking to Jean, I realized part of what she was saying to me was that we go into these systems, like in her case, post-secondary, for instance, or even with the UNDRIP law, right? We learn how the systems operate. The systems never work. And then we push back or resist through these huge reports with all sorts of recommendations, right? But then when I put that together with my last guest of last year, with Shay, when she's saying to us, we need resources in certain areas, like there's real things that are happening on the ground and nobody is hearing that we need these resources. And she mentions big things, right? Like domestic violence, supporting your young people, all of that kind of stuff. And so my first question to you is, like, how do you make change? Like, how do you make change in systems that aren't actually listening to you?
I think that's a really difficult question to answer. I think for me, since I study social development studies, we're taught about these systems, we're taught about the negative parts of these systems, and that we should fight back. Yeah. But no one ever really talks about what it's like to face rejection.
Wow. Yeah.
I would say. And then also the intimidation of being in my position and then talking to people who I would say are higher up in those systems.
And sort of, they're the people that are like higher up are the ones that have built the system.
The power imbalances. And also, I don't know, they don't really teach us like how to deal with rejection. And then also, I guess how to not be resilient, but how to kind of push against that rejection in a way.
So funny. A lot of times when you're talking about changing systems, people say, young people, they're resilient. It's one of the most hated words in my vocabulary.
I think so.
Resilient means that the system stays the same and you still thrive. Yeah. So I'm going to ask either one of you want to jump in, but how do you change the actual system so that people don't have to be resilient, so that they're actually held with care?
I think it's a difficult process to teeter almost, because you're asking someone, to be a part of the change while also still being realistic about the situation that they're living, in that moment. But I think that like holistic change needs to come from a number of different angles, because right now, as a young Black person in North America, there are so many, setbacks placed all around you, barriers to entry all around you and from every aspect of your life. And so I think that if we're going to see real change, then it needs to come both like from the family portion, right? And like the support there, financially for those families, making sure that the resources in their communities are available so that that's not taking their energy away from things. And then support in the educational systems as well from teachers, social workers, guidance counselors that actually have addressed their personal biases and have the best, in their hearts and minds for these young Black youth. And then like that support just needs to continue throughout, their journey or our journey through society. So at the university and tertiary education levels and onwards. I don't know, it's a big issue. It's a really big issue.
And there's always questions about what does support actually look like, right? And even from day to day, right? So jump in, Avery. What do you think? How do we make change?
I mean, sometimes like I imagine it almost to like play to their level of like interest and investment. If we sort of like restructure youth ourselves and encourage each other to put more care into like what is affecting us, almost like scream so loud that they can't ignore it, or show that there is importance to us as youth of like fixing our issues. Because I also find like amongst our age there are people who like really don't care or really don't know how to care about these situations. So if we like encourage ourselves to put more like interest or resources within ourselves to almost show that like, hey, we're like, we have passion here, that will kind of be, maybe there will be like economic incentive or political like gain incentive where like the people who have the power can sort of put their attention there and their resources towards like what we care about, and then hopefully we can get people who actually have the passion for it, not for just like interest for themselves, but interest for the group, to kind of like siphon themselves into it, almost like building block way ourselves into it.
In education, they sometimes talk about scaffolding. So you start off with sort of the basic building blocks of some idea that is very complicated, but you start off easy, step one. Then once they learn that, then you can add a little bit more to make it a little bit more complex, right? And when it comes to change inside these systems, I always think post-secondary is a fascinating place because, as you were saying, you're learning the system and you're fighting the system. You're learning the system in order to fight the system, which comes back to something else that Avery was saying around the restructuring. I'm very interested in the idea of youth restructuring it, even changing the way that they think about it. You know what's reminding me of? Bob Marley. Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery, none but ourselves can free our mind. Because as much as the system is hurting us, we also internalize it and then don't think that we can do things. So perhaps that's part of it as well. So just like thinking about that idea that there's things that we have to emancipate ourselves from, the way that we're thinking, what would you need to feel like you were being supported to do that kind of rethinking work?
Well, in the context of what you've described, right, like that plantation mindset that a lot of us find ourselves stuck in, I mentioned the young Black men in schools, in the school systems and higher on, because from then those messages of incompetence are being, implanted in their minds and are fed throughout their lives. But I think that it's important also for our Black community members in positions of power, like that are board members or teachers or educators or, in high positions at their company, to recognize that they have a responsibility in that position to open the door and extend to the next generation. And so we can make change, like real change, you know what I mean, from those positions where it's more feasible, because it's a bit difficult when you don't have people in those higher positions to then attack back the hand that's feeding you, if that makes sense, you know?
Yeah.
But we do often have, like, you know, one for diversity in this office and one for, you know what I mean, for the photos in this office. So when all of those people can come together and recognize that even though they've risen above or, you know, surpassed the defiances that life has placed against them, that now that they've done that, they're not better than anyone else, but they have an opportunity, you know, to help make change so that we can change what that room looks like, so that they're not the only one that looks like themselves in those spaces.
That's so important, because again, when we're thinking about, my question, I'm going to ask each of you, right? So what support do you need to be able to make those changes internally? Sometimes we think it's either or. So young people have to change, or the leaders in the world have to change. But sometimes it's both. Like when you get into that leadership position, you have to think about how you're going to mobilize your privilege. That's the language that I often use, to be able to create a space for other people to also get into a position similar to yours, or perhaps even surpass you. But if you don't have that idea of sort of looking back and making sure that other people are also climbing up that ladder and that you're helping to ensure that they can get to where they want, we don't see the change. For those that are watching, I'm going to actually make sure that I put 2 things up in our resource list. But there is actually an article by Dr. McKittrick, I think, and it's about this plantation mindset. I'll make sure that I put a link to the article so that you have a sense of what that means. It's very, very interesting, very interesting. So talk to me. What kind of support do you think you would need to be able to do that sort of internal reshifting, restructuring work that you have to do so that you are also part of building that change, or changing the way that you're actually responding to the world around you?
You touched on a lot of things that I was going to say, but I do think, I think for me, I need to know that I can be vulnerable, and that my experiences, my trauma are being dealt with in like a loving way. Instead of just as a structural way, if that makes sense. Like, I want to know that my emotions, like, you're hearing me from human to human, instead of human to teacher, or like human to police officer, you know what I mean? Like, I want to know that we're talking human to human. I think that without vulnerability and being able to share how I truly feel, the emotions that I truly feel, trauma that I've been through, I just don't see how I could shift, like, internally, just because of my past experiences dealing with certain power imbalances and power hierarchies, especially being a young Black woman. In Kitchener specifically, like early days when it was walk down the street and my family was one of the only 2 Black families on the street, like it was harder for me to feel that vulnerability with other people, and I just felt like they'll never understand me. So internally I was like, my mind
shut down,
and it's just hard to open up and be yourself. So without that vulnerability, I feel like it would just be a lot harder for me. So I think that's what I would need to feel truly supported.
And that's really, really important, because sometimes when we talk about systems, we forget that systems are actually just a bunch of people that are doing things. We think of systems as like this table or a chair or something like that, and you forget the humanity inside it. And as soon as you start to remember the humanity about how, like, who it is that's upholding these systems, there's these opportunities to actually relate in a way that is supportive. I love that.
And the idea that my story is more than just like a headline on like a news article, for example. Like, this is like real life for me. I don't have the privilege of being able to turn off my phone, turn off my TV, and all of a sudden I'm at peace. It's the fact that the peace, not the peace. The conflict carries on when everything else is off, if that makes sense.
And what I will do for those that are watching, there's some books that I have in mind around vulnerability that are also there's a bunch of studies that have been done around vulnerability, but I'll get some of those resources up on the site as well. Avery, why don't you jump in? What do you need?
Well, I was thinking even before you started, but like the idea of like kind of emotions, like having my emotions validated when I had like especially bigger ones. Yeah. Like when we talk about youth, like I know we are included in the idea of youth, but like teens, the amount of passion I had for stuff as a teen, the time and the energy especially, if I just like had an idea that like I'm not being dramatic, it's more than just my hormones. Like I know I may be 16, but I have these big ideas, I have these big emotions, I have these plans, and then someone's like, hey, like what you're doing, like there is like purpose to it. There is like I know, like I understand, like at 16 I had the idea. Executions could have been a bit better, I do admit, but the passion was there regardless. So if there was still like people around to kind of validate like the emotions and the goals of like youth and students, that maybe there would be less burnout as fast. Because it's like if I just spend my entire time screaming with no purpose, then I'm obviously going to get very tired quickly. But if like someone said like, hey, I understand that you're upset, here's what you could do about it, here's where you could go, like then I would be able to like preserve my screaming to when it's needed, so I could do it for a longer time and have it carry on.
I love it. I love it. Again, for those that are watching, the other thing that I'm going to put on to connect into that idea is that there's actually a bunch of studies that have been done in education around the deficit model that's used when you're approaching young people. So sometimes it's young boys. We often say that they don't do as well in school, but then you find out that sometimes teachers are approaching them with an expectation that they aren't going to be very smart or they're not going to be able to learn. Black boys in particular, we hear that story, versus a more affirming model that starts off with like, I know you can do this. We're going to keep working with you until we can do this. So I'll get some of those resources. Before we move on to the next set of questions, I want you to eat. Feed the young. That's important. We're going to take a quick break and then we will be right back.
David Prang from the Chamber of Commerce Brantford-Brant speaks with community members about events and organizations that impact the city of Brantford and the county of Brant. Chamber TV, Thursdays at 6:30 p.m., right here on Rogers TV.
Your Region This Week takes you behind the headlines on issues and events shaping our community. Tune in for new episodes on Mondays at 7:30 p.m. and Fridays at 6 p.m.
Guelph, the Royal City. Learn about the people, places, organizations, and events that make up your hometown. Join us each and every episode to learn more about Guelph and what's happening in the Royal City.
I'm Wendell Clark with a word about winning. We all know it takes a team effort in any sport and with any challenge. You can be a part of the winning team that shuts out impaired driving. Whether you're out on the town or just hanging out with friends, drink responsibly. Always have a plan for a safe ride home for yourself, your family, and your friends. You'll be helping to shut out impaired driving.
Visit ArriveAlive.org to find out more. Arrive Alive. Drive sober.
Sundays for Pairs is a service that we believe will help you discover more of God's promises and purpose for your life. A reminder that God is for you. Courtesy of Paris Community Church. Join us every Sunday at 10:30 a.m. on Rogers TV to be encouraged and pointed towards hope.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Before I move us into some of the other examples of what happens when we snap our fingers and we start to dream a more perfect world into being, I was thinking a lot about the first guest of the show and the last guest and what's upcoming, some of the other guests that I spoke to. And I keep thinking about this notion of a continuum of care. So really, really caring about people, and the need for us to understand that continuum like within humanity, the experiences that we have. So before I ask you the next question, I am going to remind the folks that are watching about what happened when Irwin Ellman snapped his fingers, talking about child welfare and his experiences as the former advocate for children and youth. What happened when Sonia Dennis snapped her fingers as the executive director for Family and Children's Services, Children's Aid in our region here, Waterloo region. What happened when Marjorie Knight snapped her fingers as a community advocate coming in from Cambridge, and what happened when Sharon Livingstone snapped her fingers and spoke to us about what older adults need in our community. So just give me 1 minute, and then I'll turn it back over to you.
So I remember being in a meeting with the deputy minister, and we were talking, and there was a young person with me, because I did that a lot, was who wants to come meet the deputy minister with me. And we were talking about all reports about children and youth say the same things, at least from a youth we want people, we need at least one significant person in our life. That we can talk to, who understands us and knows us, and we want to be part of our own lives. And I remember the deputy going, I think he said, because I used to make people go crazy, I'm sure, still do maybe, maybe. What do you want me to do with that? We can't legislate love, Irwin. And you know what the young person said? You probably do, because I've said this before. She said, no, deputy, we can't legislate love, but we can legislate the conditions in which love can flourish. Why don't we try that?
How does our community and provincially, how do they really consider child welfare as part of the continuum of care? So if you think about healthcare, we are the emergency room at some time, right? We don't get to close. The hospital does not run just on an emergency room. A hospital runs many different services. There's prevention services connected to a hospital, but there's also intensive intervention services like an emergency room. So if I use that medical model analogy, so are we as child welfare. So how do we think of us in the prevention space, but also in the intervention space? And how does that intersect?
I think the way that we compensate people who are on ODSP and on OW. And for that matter, the minimum wage. Whether you want to say yay or nay, the government basically set the poverty line. It's $2,000. CERB was $2,000 a month. At $2,000 a month, they said people can live. Well, then no one should get paid less than $2,000 a month.
Period.
And that, my friend, is what we could change.
A much better home care setup so that older adults can age in place and not have their families burdened with purchasing multi-hours of private home care, or again, not being able to age in place and being on the list of 50,000 people waiting for long-term care.
So now that we've seen these examples of what would happen if we really, really thought about this continuum of care, I just want you to take a moment to do two things for me. One, I'd like you to describe, like right now, what do you think that continuum of care looks like for you? And two, how much of what you describe is the responsibility of your government? It's a tough one.
I mean, I can try to kick it off.
Bring it.
I think like right away what kind of starts like screaming in my mind is like culturally relevant, especially as we have like growing demographics of Canada that have like so many different backgrounds, that there is like a lot that you can take from like our different cultures that we have here that have like intergenerational homes or different ways to view community that are a lot more interconnected than what we kind of practice like currently, and kind of having a continuum of care that reflects like key aspects and strengths of all these communities, of making sure that there's like proper funding to kind of reflect like proper community spaces or proper care for elders, and encouraging this sort of level of empathy amongst communities to like continue the idea of like it takes a village to raise a baby, but we're all the baby that can all be helped by each other. And sort of having like that's kind of where I see like the government coming in, properly allocating funding for these different groups, really putting money back into the community. Like we say that like very like it almost sounds like it's almost becoming numb, kind of saying like, you know, support the community, but like really growing community centers, community spaces, those third-party spaces that I know a lot of young people are talking about, and also making sure that there's not a forgotten group, and that there's care being allocated to them, and making sure like proper money goes, like listening to the groups, seeing what they need, and making sure that there's like funding allocated to them.
Yeah, that's really brilliant. And so again, for the folks that are watching, I'm going to make sure that there's some resources on something called culturally relevant pedagogy, because though it's in education, the idea is that you really pay attention to the people that you're trying to serve, and that you develop strategies or support systems that actually speak to that. But you also linked it right back to where we started with this notion of having an asset-based rather than deficit model when it comes to, for government, how they come up with resource allocation. So the other thing that I'm going to put on a link to reallocate Waterloo Region. I don't know if folks remember them, but they were talking and advocating for a reallocation of police funds, some of the police budget, to put into upstream supports for communities. And it was based on that same kind of idea. Different people need different things to feel safe. So let's actually just make sure that we share the wealth so people can get that. Go ahead, you were ready to jump in.
I was ready to jump in. I would say that, kind of adding on to what you were saying, when I think of continuum of care, I think also of things evolve. And I think that's something that our government doesn't necessarily always take into consideration, that just because policy or funds for certain things worked at one point doesn't mean it's always going to work out the same, or that it's always, or that doesn't evolve, to be specific. I also think that for the people within the communities as well, we do have a lot of immigrants that have different backgrounds, that have different cultural practices. I think about that as well. Like, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We need to really do the research on the people that are within our communities, and also kind of getting their feedback as well. Like I think government sees it from like, oh, like numbers, but also like I think the verbal feedback also, if they actually took that into consideration, the things that they could do politically, and like the adjustments they could make, because sometimes it's just the smallest things.
I know, sometimes the thing that people need is usually so small, and they're big huge systems that we need to change, but oftentimes it's little teeny things that we missed along the way that made that big huge problem evolve. And so I love that. I make notes all the time because you folks are going to change the world, and so that's awesome. But I think that's so important to have a model that is flexible enough, nuanced enough, that as the world evolves, so do we, is so important. And the government can, it's funny, I always think people will say the government needs to be more nimble, like when something changes, they're ready to go and whatever. But there's also something else you touched on. The government does a lot of reports. Like there's a lot of research that comes out of a government. And I mean, it doesn't matter who is in government, the government itself does a lot of research. But they don't always listen to their own research.
No, I was gonna say, they don't really take the feedback of like the results of
their own research.
And I feel like also it's because I think although they do the research, there's such a disconnect. I think they just see it as like numbers and not as people who are actually going through whatever issues they're trying to resolve. And I don't think that they put in place their research, that they have all these results say this, conclusions. It's like, where is it though?
Well, it's interesting too, because one of my guests, well, it was a pair that came to talk to me when they said that the government was going to close the safe consumption and treatment sites. And the research from the government said those sites were working, but the government made a choice that they're going to close them anyway by March. And so it's another one of those examples, like, you know, if you're going to spend, because they're using taxpayer dollars to do the research, it's not like they are paying it out of pocket, we are paying for the research, then I think you should also implement said research.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Like, I remember when you had shared that with us about the safety, you know, the safe consumption sites, and the action going against completely what the research has showed, you know, should be done in the situation. And I think, like, as much as it annoys me, it doesn't surprise me that it's not a matter of logic why, you know, we aren't making as much progress as we should be making. Unfortunately, I think there are people very strategically holding back progress of specific groups because of their own biases, and whether they're doing that consciously or subconsciously is, you know, doesn't really matter at the end of the day. But there definitely needs to be changes, you know, on a systemic level. You talked about, what was it? What was the question? Like,
so you're thinking about your continuum of care and what that looks like, right?
Continuum of care. That was the phrase. I think of, like, care coming from all different sides, I guess, you know, for youth and young adults. And I think that, like, mental health care, I'm so glad that there are, I guess, services available for, you know, elementary, high school, and university students. But I know a lot of young people, you know, aged 19 to 22, that are in desperate need of mental health services and are not in school because of it, but then also don't have access to it because of that, you know? It's like after high school, there is no access to that for that select group, which happens to be a large number of millennials that have dropped out of university, right? And that's already a tough experience to be going through. But then they don't have access to resources, you know, and then providing things at home on the family side as well, like making sure those concerns are taken care of so that they can focus on, you know, being happy, finding their passion, changing the world, you know. That continuum of care, I think, needs to happen on so many levels from so many angles to actually envelop someone in what feels like, you know,
real love,
real care.
It's funny because that continuum, that understanding of the continuum of care brings us right back to where we started, because the idea is that it's got to be responsive to what's actually happening. And so it's great if we have an investment in mental health resources, but if we put those resources in places where people can't get them, then who cares that we just invested in those resources, because the people that need it can't actually access it. And so before we're going to go to a break, but I want us to go to the break with a reminder about what we heard from Erwin Ellman, because it was so beautiful when he was speaking about that young person that he had with with him in a meeting with a minister, and he said, we can't legislate, the minister said, we can't legislate love, and this young person said, but we can legislate the conditions in which people flourish. And so I want us to take that seriously during this break. I'm going to feed the youth, as one should, and then we're going to come back and we're going to go a little bit deeper into this question of what responsibility the people that are elected have to ensure that they're part of creating those conditions to make sure that we all thrive. So we will be right back.
Public transit, garbage pickup, parks and recreation programs, snow removal on your street. How can you stay informed about these and other important local services? Tune to City Council coverage on Rogers TV. See your community leaders at work on Rogers TV City Council coverage.
Your Region This Week takes you behind the headlines on issues and events shaping our community. Tune in for new episodes on Mondays at 7:30 p.m. and Fridays at 6 p.m.
Hey everybody, it's Sean Ferfaro reminding you to tune in every Friday night at 6:30 for This Week in Rangers Nation. I'm going to have exclusive highlights and interviews with your Rangers players. I'm going to have Rangers alumni. We're going to talk to some of the coaches. And because it's me, we're going to have a little bit of fun as well. Every Friday at 6:30, everything you want to know here in our town. It's This Week in Rangers Nation, right here on Rogers TV.
Where will you win?
The opening tip. Where here is Prince. This is Canada. The NBA title is yours.
As we welcome a new era. Where will you hear the story?
Right to the rim with a slam dunk.
Catch the highlights. Dive into tapes. Where will you be when? Right here. Raptors basketball. Nothing but Sportsnet.
Struggling with today? Spend it with us. Join me, Ben Strasser, on January 20th for the 9th annual Kickback Mental Health Marathon on Rogers TV. We'll share real stories, tackle grief, anxiety, depression, addiction, and more. Together, let's heal, let's make a difference.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Okay, before I ask you another question, which I'm pretty excited to hear from you about, I want to show you and the folks that are watching 4 clips. So 4 more people, actually 5, because one of the interviews was 2 people, snapping their fingers and speaking into the world the kinds of community members that we want to be in, the communities that we want to have. And each of them are connected because they're really talking about like community building, right? So let's just take a second and watch what they were saying, and then I'm going to bring it back to you to another question for you. So let's take a peek.
Just removing the politics from public health would serve us all so well, not just for this generation, but future generations as well.
And I think following suit, I think it would be, part of the complexities that we keep being told that we don't know enough about is the funding, how the funding is structured, and the provincial pieces and the federal pieces. And so for me, it would be separating and bringing healthcare totally funded separate from everything else. Yeah. The fact that, we have allowed our housing to become a commodity, education a commodity, now healthcare, here we go. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we need to be able to separate the funding completely, and so that healthcare is funded as a whole separate thing and its own thing.
It would come down to funding, okay? And I talked about what we're spending on provincial initiatives and local levy before. Yeah. And it would be that the province takes part of the tax revenue that they receive from our region and gives it back to us, no strings attached, for us to decide what we need to do. Yeah. First of all, there is no better use of public dollars than at the municipal level. I said the lower you get with each level, the more efficient the use. And then if you give it to social groups, they turn $1 into 5. I mean, you're right, all the time.
Absolutely.
So at the municipal level, we can't budget for a deficit.
Yeah.
The province and the feds can budget for a deficit. Just give us the money. We're at the ground floor. We're at the front on this fight on a whole lot of issues.
Absolutely.
Building houses, homelessness, everything, and food, security. We just doubled what we're giving the local food bank in our last budget from $750 to $1.5 million.
Yeah.
And so just give us a better share without any strings attached to any particular program that you're advocating for, and let us use the funds as we see fit and necessary for our community.
The one thing that if I could snap my fingers, what I would do is make it a requirement for anyone in a level of government to have certain amount of hours, similar to a practicum, certain amount of hours where they are working amongst their people on a street level, where they can use that knowledge and that experience and those stories to actually be able to create to create a just and equitable society. I think that oftentimes there is a meritocracy to being elected into those positions, but the reality is we need to find ways for people who are making these decisions to be amongst the people who they most impact.
Okay, so every single one of the guests that we just watched talked about the need for elected officials in some way to be connected to community, right? They were saying it through the closure of safe injection sites. They were saying it through the way the funding models are between the provincial government and the municipal government. They were saying it through the ways in which we connect or don't connect to the real world once we're elected. And so I'm going to ask you folks another two-parter, because I like a good two-parter. So the first question is for you to reflect on why it's important for elected officials to really be connected to community. And the second part, which is actually like where my heart is right now, is what that actually looks like in practice. Because I, once upon a time, was the member of provincial parliament for Kitchener Centre, and I would argue that a lot of the people I worked with, the vast majority felt that they were connected to community. And so, but then when I talk to people on the ground, they don't feel like they are connected to their elected representatives, or that their elected representatives truly understand them in community. So I don't know who wants to jump in, but over to you.
Well, I guess I can speak a bit on that. I grew up in Toronto, and so I remember when Doug Ford was in office. Rob Ford, actually, was in office first, and a couple friends of mine had been invited to his home, like for a big barbecue thing. Yes. Yep. That he was having with, random members of the community. And then later on, I ended up meeting John Tory. And of course, we took a photo for his Instagram. And at that same event was the president of Bell Canada, the president of the Raptors, and everyone wanted a photo, And I didn't quite understand tokenism yet, you know what I mean? But I think that a lot of elected officials and just these, generally important people, I guess, in office spaces or whatever it may be, they do this in order to present the image that they're connected to a community, but real connection is way deeper than that. And I think that it's impossible for you to truly help a group without understanding what those issues are on a lived experience level.
Yeah.
And so I think it's very helpful when officials have grown up in the circumstances that they're trying to help others out of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think we need more people who have come out of those situations in order to pursue those positions, because they know what's needed in those spaces. What does that look like for someone who comes from a completely different walk of life and is trying to become connected? I honestly imagining what it looks like is feels like a funny Will Ferrell movie.
That's exactly what
you know
it would
what I
look
mean,
like.
of bridging that gap between experience and mindset. I'm honestly not sure what it would look like, having someone that comes from such a completely different space have the humility, to be around and completely understand the lifestyle on a day-to-day basis of, the minority communities that they're trying to help.
Yeah.
It would be a wonderful thing to see.
I have to tell you, it's an interesting thing to get into public office, because they literally train you into the protocols that public officials in my case it was provincial have to learn. And in the training, being trained in those protocols, you realize that they're training you in a way that disconnects you. Like some of the things that I had to now memorize and learn in order to appear like a politician, I was learning it on the other end, right? Because I was coming in from community. But it's an important question for us to ponder. So what are you thinking? What are you folks thinking? What is it, why is it important for your elected officials to be connected to community, and what does that actually look like?
I guess it's kind of what we've already touched on a little bit. Just for them to just be educated on the people that they're dealing with, I would say. And I also feel that one thing that I truly dislike is when it feels like they're coming from a place of, I feel sorry for that group.
Oh yeah.
Or I take pity. Like, I personally don't like that.
Yeah.
And I find that when you look at like other leaders that are actually from those communities, they don't feel that way. They don't feel like, oh, I feel sorry for these. It's like, oh, I want to help my people out.
Yeah.
And to me, it's deeper than just like education of like reading. I think it's like you have to be with these people. Like, go to some food shelters, go talk to some of the homeless people that you see on the street, like talk to them and like understand, like, or not even try and empathize of like what it's like to walk a day in their shoes.
It's humanizing again. It's like seeing the community as real people.
And not just like statistics.
Or pictures for your calendar. Sometimes you take pictures so that you can make your calendar at the end of the year. Like there are literally reasons that we take the pictures.
Yeah.
You know? Jump on in. What do you think?
I mean, it's important. We already kind of touched on like some of the big things, but I also kind of like imagine when someone's from the community, not only like do they know how to represent them, but they also know what to expect from their community as well. Like how almost be able to like predict reactions or how things will work out, because if something's implemented like a policy or a new kind of idea or community group, and it may not be like received well right away, if someone doesn't understand the workings of a community or an area, they'll immediately see it as like a failure, but when in reality it could just be like the demographic is like naturally a bit more hesitant or a bit more closed off to wanting to like start off on new things, and they might need a bit more encouragement. So someone from that area will know how to, you know, deal with the losses or the hurdles compared to someone who might not know the more organic and like represent like the more organic operations of an area. And when someone's not from a group, I think that it's hard to like know really what to expect, because it's like, you know, to live in something you really truly understand, like why you love to hate stuff, or like why certain things operate compared to being just like, told it. But I mean, like it's always going to be hard to constantly have an exact representative from each group being able to represent them the way they the way they need, because we don't have that we don't have those people all the time. But kind of allowing people who may be taking on community or responsibilities that are just outside of what they know, like kind of room for them to like listen and learn, and also having more than a collaborative input from the community to kind of guide them, like using joint assets, like they know kind of the structural stuff, the technicalities, and you know the heart and soul of the operations, and being able to use their position with the knowledge of the group to kind of fill in the gap of someone who's like from there representing the group.
You know what, that's so important. I remember I kept thinking about this moment when I was elected. I talk a lot about teaching out. So same thing, this notion of mobilizing your privilege. So you get to a position of power and you're learning about systems. I think it's our responsibility to tell the community or the people that we're connected to how the systems really operate so that they can better navigate them. And so when I was elected, I was the chair of the Black Caucus. It was the first time in Ontario's history that this huge number of Black folks were elected to a single party. The big number was 5. And I remember committee meetings were happening and Black folks weren't showing up at committee. And then I realized I had never been to a committee meeting at Queen's Park, and I didn't know how it happened. And one of the things that happened in those committee meetings was that you were timed, and if you went over time, they would turn your mic off. And I kept thinking, if my mummy came to a committee meeting and had a thing to say and told her stories as she does, and they'd shut her mic off, she would think that's so rude. And so why would you put yourself into that kind of a position? So I ended up taking the committee structure into communities to teach them how it operates. And I apologized in advance for how rude it might feel, but we need to train ourselves then to talk in this system while this is the system that's actually determining what our life is going to look like. But I think that there's, you folks have shared a million amazing ideas about what it is that we can do to think differently about how our political system operates. And I just want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you a billionfold.
Thank you for having us.
Honestly, listen. But it's not over. We're going to take a break, and then we will be right back.
Personal finance show that dares to ask those money questions you've always wanted to. Join Mike Bregueth when he talks with experts on all aspects of money. Money Matters with Mike Bregueth, Thursdays at 8 p.m. on Rogers TV.
David Prang from the Chamber of Commerce, Brantford-Brant, speaks with community members about events and organizations that impact the city of Brantford and the county of Brant. Chamber TV, Thursdays at 6:30 p.m., right here on Rogers TV.
Hello, welcome to Lions TV Bingo. An announcement, we are now on Mondays. Yes, every Monday from now on, Lions TV Bingo is going to be here on Rogers, and we're off like a herd of turtles. Roll 29. 4 $500 prizes, one $3,500 prize, all the trivia you can imagine, and some of my bad jokes. We'll see you this Monday.
Summer days, summer nights, lots of things to do, places to go, and people to see. If you're having a few drinks, be sure to plan ahead and get home safely. We don't want to pick you up. Drinking drivers risk injuries to themselves and others and take chances with their license, their jobs, and their future. Remember what's at stake and choose your ride, whether you're the driver, the passenger, or the party host. Thanks for supporting sober driving. I hope we never meet.
Visit arrivealive.org to find out more.
Struggling with today? Spend it with us. Join me, Ben Strasser, on January 20th for the 9th annual Kickback Mental Health Marathon on Rogers TV. We'll share real stories, tackle grief, anxiety, depression, addiction, and more. Together, let's heal, let's make a difference.
Hello, and thank you again for watching. Weren't my students brilliant? Like, absolutely phenomenal. It's not easy to be approached with some of these high-level questions, especially when you're in the process of learning about politics and learning about government and learning about who you are and what your place is in the communities that you're working in or learning in or trying to thrive within. But to come here and to really speak what I like to call real talk, man, I am so grateful that I have the privilege of working with young people in this community for that very reason. And so if you're interested in hearing more from some of my guests, then please follow me on Instagram. It's at everydaypolitics_official. By all means, send me messages. I've had a few viewers sending me messages talking about some of their favorite episodes, so why don't you become one of those folks? And if there's anybody at all that you'd like me to speak to, topics that you want me to take on in 2025, then shoot me a message, and I'm your girl. So enjoy your day. Thanks again for tuning in, and we will see you next week.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
Think it's okay to drive high? Think again. Drug-impaired driving is as illegal as drunk driving, and in Ontario, the penalties are the same. If police suspect you're driving under the influence of drugs of any kind, or a combination of drugs and alcohol, and you fail a roadside test, your license will be suspended immediately for up to 30 days. You'll pay a penalty of $198. And you can be charged with a criminal offense of impaired driving, the same as alcohol. Driving high is never okay.
Hey everybody, it's Sean Ferfaro reminding you to tune in every Friday night at 6:30 for This Week in Rangers Nation. I'm going to have exclusive highlights and interviews with your Rangers players. I'm going to have Rangers alumni. We're going to talk to some of the coaches, and because it's me, we're going to have a little bit of fun as well. Every Friday at 6:30, everything you want to know here in our town. It's This Week in Rangers Nation right here on Rogers TV.
Sundays for Pairs is a service that we believe will help you discover more of God's promises and purpose for your life. A reminder that God is for you. Courtesy of Pairs Community Church. Join us every Sunday at 10:30 a.m.